They were called the families. They lived by a code older than the country itself, and for nearly a century, they ran America from the shadows. Every week, we open the files on the men who built the underworld, the bosses, the wars, the rituals, the betrayals, the blood oaths that bound them, and the secrets they swore to take to the grave. Subscribe. Some stories were never meant to be told.
Henry Hill's underworld fantasy. By the tender age of 12, Henry Hill was living a pure underworld fantasy, pulling in more cash than he could even figure out how to spend. At first, he threw his newfound wealth around like a miniature kingpin, treating his classmates to galloping horse rides through the Canarsie marshes and paying for their days at Steeplechase Amusement Park, topping it off with thrilling rides on the 260-foot parachute drop. But soon, the innocence of kids his own age bored him. He looked at his father, a hard-working subway man who helped organize the Electrical Workers Union but could never afford any extras for his cramped, 7-child household, and decided right then and there that grinding, working-class life wasn't for him. Henry was entirely focused on the payday. He was learning how to earn. The cabstand was a non-stop conveyor belt of illicit goods, exposing the boy to a daily avalanche of swag. Crates of stolen toasters, hot cashmere sweaters fresh off a hijacked truck, and cartons of untaxed cigarettes flowed in and out of the dispatch center. Young Henry quickly graduated to running policy slips, delivering shopping bags full of bets to secret mob accounting rooms operating right out of the apartments of his schoolmates' parents. With cash burning a hole in his pocket, the 13-year-old marched into Benny Fields on Pitkin Avenue, the local mobster's favorite clothier, and bought himself a razor-sharp, dark blue pinstriped, double-breasted suit. When his mother took one look at her boy and screamed that he looked just like a gangster, Henry couldn't have been prouder. He was a cardboard wise guy, slicking back his hair, sipping bitter black coffee, and slipping past racetrack security guards. He was also becoming a masterful, relentless teenage hustler. He sold fireworks, acted as a mini-fence by fronting cash to juvenile burglars for stolen radios, and even paid cab drivers to buy 6-packs of beer so he could sell them at a markup to kids in the schoolyard. But his most daring exploits happened just before big, cash-heavy holidays like Easter and Mother's Day, when he would skip school entirely to go cashing with a junkie horse player named Johnny Mazzola. Armed with counterfeit $20 bills bought for just 10 cents on the dollar from a forger in Ozone Park, the duo would hit the streets. Mazzola taught the kid the dark arts of passing bad paper, softening the fake bills overnight with cold coffee and cigarette ashes to make them look worn, pretending to be in a frantic rush at the register, and never carrying more than one counterfeit bill at a time. It was a brilliant, fail-safe scam. If a cashier ever caught the fake, Henry would instantly turn on the waterworks, crying hysterically that his mother would beat him for losing the money, before sprinting out the door to hit another neighborhood. By the end of a long day of scamming merchants, the back of their car would be completely blinded by a mountain of $2 purchases, donuts, cigarettes, soap, and razor blades, all bought with the mob's phony 20s. Step right into the relentless hustle. Step right into the relentless, everyday hustle of a teenage mob apprentice, where every holiday and every honest job was just another angle for a scam. For young Henry Hill, the street education never stopped, and neither did the cons. Take Christmas, for example. Teddy Vario taught the kid how to drill holes into the trunks of worthless, junk Christmas trees and stuff them with loose branches to make them look full and lush. They would hawk these rigged trees at premium prices under the cover of night near the subway station, fully aware that the moment some unsuspecting family weighed them down with ornaments, the loose branches would fall out and the tree would completely collapse. The mob's sheer obsession with stealing permeated everything they did. Teddy specifically got Henry a job unloading deliveries at a high-class Italian grocery store just so the kid could hurl the most expensive items, imported olive oil, tuna, and prosciutto, right through the open windows of Teddy's strategically parked taxicabs. The Varios had more than enough cash to buy the entire store, but in the underworld, stolen goods simply tasted better. Even Paul Vario, a powerful Lucchese capo, constantly begged Henry for stolen credit cards to use when he took his wife out on the town. Paulie affectionately called these hot cards muldoons, and he insisted that liquor always went down smoother on a muldoon. For a heavy-hitting boss like Paulie, the floor show or the high-end food didn't really matter. His ultimate thrill was the sheer, intoxicating joy of robbing someone and getting away with it. But petty theft was just the appetizer. After 6 months at the cabstand, Henry graduated to the big leagues by helping the Varios run their highly lucrative floating card and dice games. Henry spent his daylight hours alongside mobster Bruno Faxiolo, assembling professional-grade crap tables, and his nights steering wealthy gamblers from local pickup spots, like a neighborhood candy store or deli, to the secret game locations. The absolute brazenness of the Vario crew knew no bounds. In a stunning display of neighborhood corruption, Babe Vario actually bought off a school custodian so the syndicate could host their high-stakes games right in the basement of Henry's own school, Junior High School 149. These fabulous, illicit casinos pulled in 30 to 40 heavy hitters a night, reeling in wealthy garment center executives, doctors, dentists, businessmen, and nearly every prominent wise guy in the city. While the dice rolled and the cash piled up, Henry acted as the teenage lookout, scanning the streets for the police. He didn't have to sweat the local beat cops, as they were already comfortably sitting on the Vario family payroll, but he had to keep a sharp eye out for plainclothes detectives from the division. The young wise guy quickly developed a razor-sharp radar for these undercover officers, learning to spot them instantly by their dirty black Plymouths, the untucked shirts they used to conceal their weapons and handcuffs, and the unmistakable, intimidating swagger of a man with a badge. Step right into the high-stakes, hidden rooms of the 1950s underground. Step right into the high-stakes, hidden rooms of the 1950s underground, where the Vario crew's floating casinos were operated with the ruthless precision of a Vegas floor. These were fully professional setups featuring veteran card dealers, crap game boxmen, stickmen, and doormen, complete with a bartender keeping the liquor flowing and loan sharks hovering nearby to pick up the action. Every single pot was sliced 5 or 6% for the house, raking in fortunes while a teenage Henry Hill was discovering his own illicit angles. Realizing he could pocket more cash by making the gamblers' sandwiches himself, Henry cut the local deli owners, Al and Evelyn, right out of the loop. But in the underworld, everyone protects their turf. Al and Evelyn cornered the 13-year-old on the street, complaining about lost business, and offered him his very first kickback, a 5-cent cut for every dollar he spent with them. Playing it cool and savoring the thrill of being treated like a hardened adult, the young wise guy negotiated them up to 7 cents on the dollar. This was 1956, a golden, untamed era just before the infamous Appalachian Raid and the bloody rebellion of Crazy Joey Gallo, and it was exactly when Henry met a true underworld legend. Enter Jimmy Burke. At just 24 or 25 years old, Burke was already a mythic figure who walked into the card games like a one-man parade. While the Italian mobsters were notoriously cheap and violently resented losing their cash, Jimmy threw money around with wild, intoxicating abandon. He would casually toss a $100 bill to the doorman just for opening the door, shove hundreds into the pockets of the game runners, and hand the bartender $100 just for keeping the ice cubes cold. Young Henry started out getting $5 tips for fetching beers, which quickly escalated to $20 bills, leaving the kid mesmerized by a man who was literally sawbucking him to death. But Jimmy wasn't just a heavy tipper, he was one of New York's most prolific hijackers, a man who possessed an absolute, sweating passion for stealing. He would knock over hundreds of trucks a year around the airports, enthusiastically unloading the stolen cargo himself until sweat poured down his face. He earned his famous street moniker, Jimmy the Gent, through a brilliantly twisted psychological tactic during his heists. Like most hijackers, Jimmy would steal the truck driver's license to silently warn the victim that the mob knew where he lived, but the gent would always stuff a $50 bill into the terrified driver's wallet before vanishing into the night. This bizarre generosity actually won him friends at the airport, turning victimized drivers into willing informants who eagerly tipped Jimmy's crew off to rich cargo loads. Things escalated to the point where the police were forced to assemble an entire army just to stop him, but the lawman completely failed. Why? Because Jimmy the Gent simply made the cops his partners, effortlessly corrupting them with bribes. To Jimmy Burke, buying off the police was a joke, as easy as feeding elephants at the zoo. As he famously put it, all you need is peanuts. Underworld education of a teenage Henry Hill. Listen up, because the underworld education of a teenage Henry Hill is about to escalate, and the characters he's mingling with are straight out of a nightmare. You've got to understand the kind of men young Henry was idolizing on the streets of Brooklyn. Take Jimmy Burke, a guy who actually cheered for the bad guys in the movies and named his two sons Frank James and Jesse James. Jimmy was a brawler with a broken nose and fast hands, a man so volatile he could be your best friend at dinner and then blow you away for dessert. People were absolutely terrified of him, but because he was such a brilliant earner who brought in serious cash for boss Paul Vario and the crew, his pure craziness was tolerated. By the time Henry turned 14, he wasn't just running errands anymore, He was getting officially embedded into the mob's labor rackets. As a birthday present, Tutti and Lenny Vario handed the teenager a highly coveted union card for the bricklayers local. Make no mistake, this wasn't for an honest day's work. The card, which carried a hefty $190 a week salary plus extensive healthcare and fringe benefits, was given to Henry so he could be planted as a no-show employee on a local contractor's payroll. The Varios simply divided up his phantom salary, while Henry used his union status to freely roam construction sites, collecting daily policy bets and loan shark payments before bringing the illicit cash back to the basement of the Presto Pizzeria for the mob's accountants. The kid was living the absolute dream, even getting a kick out of wetting down the new bricks with a fire hose, all while deceiving his parents by pretending to go to school and leaving his textbooks at the mob's cab stand. But every street hustle hits a snag. The walls nearly came crashing down when Henry's father intercepted a letter from the school's truant officer revealing that the boy hadn't attended classes in months. The devastating discovery earned Henry a brutal beating from his father with a belt. The next day, battered and terrified that he'd be forced to quit his lucrative underworld gig, Henry confessed his problem to Tutti. Now, how does the Mafia solve a truancy problem? With pure, unadulterated intimidation. Tutti didn't write a fake sick note, he ordered Henry and a couple of thugs into a car for a ride. They spotted the neighborhood mailman delivering his route, and in broad daylight, the mobsters snatched the terrified federal employee right off the street and crammed him into the back of their car. The kidnapped postman, turning gray with fear, was hauled back to the pizzeria. There, Tutti issued a chilling, point-blank ultimatum. He demanded to know if the mailman recognized young Henry and knew where he lived. When the trembling man nodded, Tutti laid down the law, ordering that all future mail from the school be delivered directly to the pizza parlor. To ensure absolute compliance, Tutti threatened to shove the mailman feet first into the blazing pizza oven if a single letter from the school ever reached the Hill household again. The ruthless tactic worked flawlessly, and the flow of truant officer letters instantly stopped. It worked so well that eventually, Henry's mother had to go down to the post office just to complain about their missing mail. For Henry, his formal education was effectively over. Sitting in a classroom learning about American democracy felt utterly absurd when he was already fully immersed in a dangerous, thrilling life of what he described as 18th-century Sicilian thievery. Blood on the streets of Brooklyn. Blood on the streets of Brooklyn was just another night shift for a teenage Henry Hill. Picture this, a man comes sprinting down Pitkin Avenue, screaming at the top of his lungs that he's been shot. When he got close, Henry realized the guy's hand looked like a gruesome package of raw meat wrapped in white string, the bloody result of putting his hand up to stop a point-blank shotgun blast. Inside the local pizzeria, Larry Bolello, a mob cook who had already served 25 years for murdering a police officer, violently barked at Henry to shut the door. The reason was chillingly simple: mob boss Paul Vario had a strict rule against anyone dying inside his establishments. Instead of bringing the victim inside, Henry dragged a chair out onto the pavement so the bleeding man could sit, quickly stripping off his own apron to fashion a makeshift tourniquet. The victim bled so profusely that Henry burned through 8 aprons before the ambulance finally arrived. And his reward for this frantic sidewalk triage? Bolello viciously chewed the kid out for wasting the pizzeria's good aprons. But the violence in Henry's world wasn't just random, it was strictly business, especially when outsiders tried to muscle in on Vario territory. Enter a naive Army veteran from Alabama or Tennessee who thought he could open a rival dispatch called the Rebel Cab Company right around the corner on Glenmore Avenue. This stubborn Southerner made the fatal mistake of undercutting the mob's prices, working around the clock, and offering heavy discounts to late-night subway commuters. Tutti Vario personally paid the man a visit to warn him that there wasn't enough room in the neighborhood for 2 cab companies, but the upstart refused to listen or back down. In the underworld, you don't ask twice. Tutti ordered Henry to meet him after midnight and showed up hauling a 5-gallon drum of gasoline. Under the cover of darkness, they crept to the Rebel lot, where Tutti handed the teenager a rag-wrapped hammer and pointed at the rival fleet. As Henry enthusiastically smashed the windows of the cabs, Tutti methodically shoved gasoline-soaked newspapers through the shattered glass. Knowing the danger of the impending blast, the one-legged mobster hopped away down the block with astonishing speed, handing Henry a fistful of matches. Henry struck a match, set an entire matchbook on fire, and tossed it into the first cab, repeating the arson down the line until the vehicles erupted into a violent chain of deafening explosions. As the teenager sprinted away from the blazing inferno in the intense heat, he looked down the street to see Tutti Bates in the orange glow of the flames, wildly waving the empty gas can in the air like a victorious track coach. It was a ruthless baptism by fire for the young wise guy, perfectly setting the stage for what would come next in his criminal education, his very first arrest at the tender age of 16. Closing recap, the making of a wise guy. So let's rewind the tape on the dark, dizzying education of young Henry Hill, a kid who traded a cramped Brooklyn row house and a working-class father for a sidewalk kingdom built on stolen goods, bloody aprons, and burning taxicabs. At just 12 years old, Henry had already chosen his side. While other kids were riding the parachute drop at Steeplechase Park on his dime, Henry was studying the only curriculum that ever mattered to him, the art of the earn. The cabstand was his classroom, swag was his textbook, and Tutti Vario was his headmaster. By 13, he was strutting into Bennyfields in a double-breasted pinstripe suit, looking every inch the cardboard wise guy his mother feared he'd become. Then came the hustles. The counterfeit 20s softened in coffee and ash. The hot muldoons that made Vario's liquor taste sweeter. The rigged Christmas trees collapsing under suburban ornaments. The high-stakes craps games rolling in the basement of his own school while teenage Henry stood lookout, learning to spot a plainclothes cop by the dirt on his Plymouth and the swagger in his step. He watched Jimmy the Gent Burke sawbuck the room into submission, a man who tipped doormen hundreds and bought off cops with peanuts, a brawler who could be your best friend at dinner and blow you away for dessert. He took a no-show union card as a birthday present and learned that the mob's solution to a truant officer wasn't a sick note, it was kidnapping a federal mailman and threatening to shove him feet first into a pizza oven. And by 16? Henry had already dragged the bleeding man onto the pavement, burnt through 8 aprons stopping the flow of blood, and torched an entire fleet of rival cabs while a one-legged mobster waved an empty gas can in victory under the orange glow of the flames. This wasn't a kid falling into crime. This was a kid sprinting toward it, eyes wide open, pockets full of cash, and not a single regret. But here's the thing about a life built on stolen goods and burning cars, the fire always comes back around. Because what's waiting for Henry Hill next is his very first arrest, and the moment he learns the most important lesson the Mafia ever teaches its own. You never rat. You never talk. And you never, ever trust the man sitting next to you. If you made it this far, you're already one of us. Smash that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling me which scam hit you the hardest, the counterfeit 20s, the rigged Christmas trees, or the mailman in the pizza oven, and stay locked in. Because in the next episode, the cuffs come out, the bodies start dropping, and the wise guy life Henry Hill fell in love with starts showing him its real face. This is just the beginning. The blood, the betrayal, the money, the murder, it's all still coming. Stay dark. Stay tuned.